Okay, it's recording. I probably want to stay in. So I'm probably going to just stay in here. Because they want me to like make videos during Okay, I'm fine with staying. I did, yeah. I'm okay to stay though. No. I talked to different people, they said I could go and they just, I would prefer that I would stay there.
I'm probably really whatever.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Whoa, that is really loud. Yeah, for Rick.
It's Rick's love.
There we go. Yeah, it is for Rick's level. I'll just hold it out here. So go ahead and start taking your seats. Settle in. We'll get started here in just a minute. All right, so here's how tonight's going to go. Rick's going to kind of do a call to worship for us in this space. Is this working consistently?
We're now.
I'll tell you what.
Try the other one.
Rick's going to start us off with a little something about poetry in this time, and then I'm going to introduce the anthology that we're here to launch, and then we have some alumni who are going to come up, and we're going to kind of talk about how this workshop space has developed over time and the lasting influences of it. After that, we're going to leave. This may be in theory, the lights hot and on. For anyone who is either in the anthology or was a student here in workshop with Rick, to come up and share memories. Not really like a wedding toast kind of thing, but memories of their time here, anecdotes. Feel free to throw your fellow classmates under the bus. And or to read a poem. We would never do that. We would never kind humans. And what was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, and then we have Julia Beach, who is my co-editor, has COVID, could not make it. We were going to call her in, and she's brain fogged and fatigued and down for the evening. But she's put together a PowerPoint presentation. When people sent in work for this anthology, they also filled out a questionnaire that involved some questions about their time here. And we took excerpts from that and some pictures that people sent in, and we have a PowerPoint presentation going over here that I'll send to the contributors afterwards. So I'll turn it over to Rick now.
I see all the questions now. I got the answers. I should say something about this book first. It's really amazing. I started to read through it the other day, and my wife asked me to read one of the poems out of it. And I couldn't do it. I started to get all choked up. And I thought to myself, talk about your students outshining you. It was pretty amazing to see what they had done. So thanks for putting all that together. It was such a total surprise too. And so I'm honored by that, but I have to say, none of those students, although they went to my workshop, could have really done anything that they did without taking the other classes in the literature department, the other creative writing classes with their own Sybil and other people. You know, we have, I don't anymore because I'm not here. An incredible English department. And so people are doing fantastic things in there. They're fantastic teachers. And this book is a testament to the whole university. So Sybil asked me to say something. I had talked about the role of a writer in our times a little bit the other night, and she asked me to kind of repeat some of that. So that's what I'm going to do here. The other day I mentioned how my friend, the poet Mark Jarman, who had been to Meacham several years ago, sent me a Doonesbury cartoon of a woman teaching black history in Florida. And her students worried she would be jailed, telling her to escape over the border. The thing is, Mark said, most newspapers declined to print it for fear of reprisals. If there's one thing I learned when working with Slovene and International PEN during the Yugoslav wars, is that dictators of all sorts, of the left as well as the right, don't so much hate writers as they fear them, deeply fear them, because we tell the truth. And that's why we worked then to smuggle writers as well as journalists, artists, and musicians out of Sarajevo. And I don't mean some were targeted basically because of political writings. My friend Tamar Shalaman was put in jail for 6 months by the Communist Party simply for writing a personal poem that was not in the officially accepted style. The poems were non-political, but they feared that expressing oneself would lead to contradictions of the state's positions and ideas. And that's why poetry and fiction are so very important today to those in those countries that now fall under dictatorships or once did. And that's what the Nobel poet Czesław Miłosz wrote, and why he wrote that Americans are naive to think things like that don't happen here. So what's the role of a writer in difficult times, as the poet Holderlin once asked? My friend and poet, the late Donnie Zeitz, analyzed this in terms of writers and our use of language, as he described what he called the stalkers. The stalkers, he said, they keep inventing new words, thus alienating their speech from the language of the native land. The stalkers use their language to create a land of their own exclusive domain, accessible only to the initiated. Those who do not know how to use their language, is not actually a language, but a curious hodgepodge of words floating on the surface and obstructing the view of the depths. They stand out in the crowd like a sore thumb. For Zeitz and for us, as writers, it's crucial that we use language to tell the truth about everything we experience, to reclaim that land. As the poet Robert Haas writes, because rhythm has direct access to the unconscious, because it can hypnotize us, enter our bodies and make us move, it is power, and power is political. That is why rhythm is always revolutionary ground. It is always the place where the organic rises to abolish the mechanical, and where energy announces the abolition of tradition, new rhythms and new perceptions. And why are your personal experiences so valuable? Here is Stanisław Baranczyk, the Polish poet, in relationship to technique and a higher vision. He says, regardless of theme and specific address, poetry is always some kind of protest. That's why all the metaphors and rhythms. It's just a way of putting the world's chaotic gibberish in some meaningful order and restoring the original weight to abused words. That's why all the concreteness and conciseness, to resist the gulfing power of the world's empty abstractions and statistical generalities. And that's why all the speaking in first person singular and seeing things from a strictly individual perspective. It's poetry's way of standing up to the world whenever it tries to elbow the individual aside and off the stage. As Irish poet Evan Balance remarks, if poetry does not address public grief in some way, it runs the risk of abandoning one of its great roles. So the thing is, experience, to record things, to imagine things, to remember and share all that with each other in publications and small groups and with friends is the most crucial thing. And I think this anthology is a good first step in doing that.
When you're going to launch a book, you should have the book in your hand. Hold on. Thank you. All right. Almost have what I have together. All right, so I have this, I love lists. I have this to-do list app on my phone with lists in it. And the one I was using retired like 10 years ago, and I switched to a new one. But that app is still on my phone. And if I open it from 10 years ago, there's an action item that says, create an anthology of Rick Jackson students. This has been in my head over 10 years, probably around 15 years, but it didn't make sense. I could never wrap my head around what that would mean. I knew that this was a special group, a special time, that workshop room that we were in, something special was happening in there, and I think most of us that were in that room knew that. But what didn't make sense to me made sense when Rick had his retirement party. And I was like, that's the problem. We didn't have this in. Like, I couldn't define the set of people who had been in that room. And once Rick retired, I knew who the universe was that we should work with. So at first we thought we would make this a surprise for Rick. And so we started with the people I knew I had email addresses for and emailed them and said, and who else should be in here? And they sent me names, and we went through round after round after round of this for, I think, over 6 months. And the list grew to like, I think close to 80 people, and it turned out that included Rick Jackson's neighbors, people from Vermont College, like people who had really no connection to the program. So when we culled it down, it was more like the 70s. I couldn't get a hold of everyone, and a few people didn't, for whatever reason, to various reasons, mostly because they weren't writing anymore, didn't participate. But we're left with 57 graduates of the program. And those 57 graduates have to date published, I think, over 140 books is the count. And I think we have Guggenheims, we have NEA, we have PEN Award winners, we have people teaching at, I think there are over 38 colleges represented, and the influence that keeps going from Rick to the next generation. So as I said, I've always known that was a special room, and I've always felt honored by the people I was in that room with, even the people who had left that room before I got there and who came to that room after I left. So this anthology, I feel, is the first time we have everyone who was in that room who kept on writing afterwards in the same place at the same time. It's like we collapsed that 46 years of workshop into now. And I love that we have, I think, around 20 of us in the room today. So people who graduated in the early 80s all the way to 2023 are here today, but we were all in that room if you stretch out that timeline. So, and Julia, my co-editor who has COVID and wishes she could be here, was my college roommate, and could not have done this without her because she fills in the gaps that I'm horrible at. Let's see. I wasn't a writer when I came to UTC. That changed when Rick talked me into taking a workshop. I think that there was probably half of the people who were in that room because of that reason. This feels to me like it's a brag book and like it's gratitude all at the same time. I just want the world to know, like, these are the people that I grew up with. We developed each other's voices. And one question that Julia and I really wanted to answer with this is, I think it's rare to have a program where you had one dominant teacher in a room for 46 years. And so we all, and it went, I think another thing that's unusual is the seniors and the freshmen were in the room together. So the freshmen who had learned to write, or the seniors who had learned to write, passed down that lore to the freshmen, and the freshmen came up to speed really quickly. And in rowing, we have something called hot seating a boat, where you come in with the equipment and you're going to use the equipment for the next race. So rowers just jump out of it and new rowers just jump in and you go. Sometimes you keep some of the same people. And it feels like that room was being hot seated constantly, where you had people jumping out, people jumping in, people graduating, people coming in as freshmen. But that knowledge and that lore just kept going. And we kind of, I think, developed a dialect of poetry from that space. So one thing we're hoping to answer is, what do we have in common? And what is it that a workshop imparts to writers? And I think we found some things that we have in common in our dialect. The book is a book of gratitude, but also of scientific inquiry of what influence means. We've dedicated it to Rick, but also it's to Earl, and to Sybil, and to Sarah, and to Chris, and to Andrew, and to the Meacham writers who came. All those voices got brought into that Rick Jackson room and influenced our discussion as the years went on. So now we're going to call up 5 graduates from different eras, and we're going to kind of talk about what happened and how things changed over time for that. So we have Charlie Scott representing the 80s. We have Magdalene Hammond-Hegwig, and if Melanie Jordan has made it, I know she got stuck. Okay, you know what, when she comes in, we're gonna embarrass her and make her come up to the front. So she's on her way. Taylor Lloyd, you're representing the thousands, right?
Yeah, early thousands.
Early thousands, and then we have Jared Steinman, who is one of our very last graduates. We do have Jared here, right? Yes, get up here. You're people I only know through email, but we did talk on Zoom once. This actually was one of the great things I think about putting together the anthology. Jared, who I had never met and who graduated in 2020, asked me, does anyone in the graduate set do translation? And I put him in touch with, I think, 3 people who had graduated who had translation experts, which you were able to talk to help you with the Fulbright that you were doing at the time in Mexico working on translation. So this idea of community, and none of those had overlapped with your time, right? Yeah. All right, so the first question we're going to ask, let's start with the poem. Want to do that? So one thing I asked them to do is to pick a poem from the anthology to read that was kind of from their era, but that is not their poem, so that we're going to have 4 more people represented up here on the stage. You don't have to, but you have to find someone else to.
I feel like the 80s should go.
All right.
Here you go.
I'm good, thanks. I think you can hear me. Can you hear me? All right.
No, probably not.
The mic is microphone. Hello. All right. So I'm Charlie Scott, and I graduated in the '80s, and I did a lot of good things with Rick, including
Charlie, can you speak a little more loud?
Oh no, really? It's,
Yes.
okay, sorry. And it's how is that? Is that good?
When you go back, they're gonna have to be.
That's better. All right. I will hold this thing close.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, I'm going to read a poem from that era by my friend and former classmate David Frank, who's sitting right down here on the front row, with another former classmate, Liz Elder. The poem is called One True Thing. Daniel washes Dorothy's hair in the kitchen at the sink one late morning in May because she's afraid to let some young woman press her frail spine against the cold porcelain and quiz her about TV and the grandkids and lie about how thick her hair has become. Our mother, a small town beauty queen, bent now, unspools stories as Daniel first wets her hair, wipes water from her eyebrows. She is talking the way a fly knocks against a window, because she has been injured somehow by being alone with her thinking. So her son, who rubbed shampoo between his hands to warm it gently, like smoothing a child's scarf, eases the lather below our mother's ears to the nape of her neck. Her nails are chipped and blued from errant hammer strikes. You could peel a raw egg without spilling it, Dorothy says. And Daniel rinses her hair by scooping warm water in his palm and directing it over her scalp. She talks about doctors. She says, "You are my man now, and some days I just want to die." He raises her up wordlessly, tucks a towel around her narrow shoulders, and she looks up at him from the chair with wonder, as if she just remembered the one true thing.
So I'm Magdalene Hoeg. I went by Hammond back then. I was going to read a poem by Paul Guest, whose voice was so different and singular to me when I first started in 1993. But it's a really long poem, so I'm going to skip to the next page and read one by Carrie Paul, who also has a very distinctive voice and who I love and am very sad is not here. So this poem is called Index Utensils. Identify the boring artifacts, dirty bones and enemy souls, wooden among a tree's leaves. Expect the scandal, different tobacco, different trapdoor, alone, horny, adequately greet the big man by the handful, by the beautiful diameter. He decorates it hanging documentation to prove it. White pearl patterns attract, fertilize, extract. Do not fade or deteriorate. Plant another tree. Its warm clay shell, like the most basic wooden spoon, discarding every fruit.
Carrie is also the artist of the cover art. She's, yeah, very talented.
Hello, I'm Taylor Loy. I was here between 99 and 2004, 4-ish, 5-ish. And now that I know that we're reading these poems to bring more people here, I want to read them all. So today I'm going to read a poem by Kelly Moore, The End of the Aquatic Apes, with lines from Zhuangzi. 1. The bottom halves of people in the sea trail from them like squid ink. I've seen how the water tricks the body out of itself. Our legs wave about, thoughtless, as we stare in the distance. I hate the cold of entering the water, how the skin shrivels, folds in all the chill. 2. One day, we won't recognize our own limbs. If tomorrow my left arm is transformed into a rooster, I'll go looking for night's end. If my right arm turns into a crossbow, I'll hunt for owls to roast. If my hips become a pair of wheels, if my shadow takes the form of a horse, I'll ride away. 3. Who will carry us back to the water when the sun goes down?
Howdy, everybody. My name is Jared. I graduated in 2020. Was very fortunate to have 6 straight years of Rick's, or straight semesters rather. I was on 4. Semesters of Rick's workshop. Shortly before he graduated, I was on one of the last, if not the last, trip to Slovenia. And I'm going to read a poem by Cass McKinney, who I didn't see here today. Has anyone seen Cass? No. I ran Cass's freshman orientation, so it's very cool to be published alongside of them in this book. I chose this poem, Pelican Thoughts, Cinnamon Beach, Florida, on page 149, if you're following along, because pelicans were my father's favorite animal. Pelicans hover in ritual, fluid bodies above waves with old wings extending, shadowing new. They summon wind and learn to harvest a fresh breeze. These things sustain them, as well as they sustain me. We are hungry and content. They pray before a meal, and I hear my mother in the echo of squawking amens. I wonder if we picture God the same way. My mother, myself, and the birds. Is he always a flash of feathers and flesh descending into the crest of a wave? Their religion will always be a mystery. I'm a still observer, a guest at the table to an unforeseen feast, bodies in the water, a witness to slaughter. From my beach chair, I watch a spray of silver fish scatter. Survivors, envisioning a raft of feathers, triumphant squawks after some slither into a maw. From the sound, perhaps, a first kill. Flesh is taken and received. The day is bright above rejoicing wings. Thanks.
And I'm going to read one of Julia's Beach's poems. In the Garden of Dread reply. She wanders into the wild, carrying scissors in her mouth, shrugs the narrow shoulder of stillness for the pleasure of watching willow warblers startle from cup-shaped nests while searching for telltale signs of postcards on hedgerow bottoms. A stamp that planted roots, a salutation that slipped its boots in the rain and arrived with one wet sock. Of all seasons, spring is the most covered mimic, where days arranged like shelves, broad with purpose at the end of winter's purge. Freshly, the wind carries the penny blacks to the orchard canopy to find perch between God and the ground, to deliver from the void something more than lost, something, some wild thing, astray with need. All right, now we're going to go to the panel part of this. So we're going to start with, what was UTC's workshop's role in your writing and voice development? We're going to start with you, and then I'll start with someone different every time. All right.
So I came in 1993. Unlike some folks, I think I always knew I wanted to write. I wrote in high school, and I came into UTC as a triple major in English, creative writing, theater, and psychology. And I quickly realized that I didn't want to do 2 of those, and that I wanted to do creative writing, and that was in large part because of the workshop and how I knew it was just a fantastic space. And the thing I really loved is something that Danielle has already alluded to, which was that we were in the classroom with folks who were much farther along than us. And so I was able to just start learning immediately from these really talented, fantastic people who welcomed me into the community, and also make fun of me a lot, which Rick also did. That was sort of his, teaching methodology, right? Was to make you feel just a little bit bad about yourself. So, so then you would try harder. But that was, it turned out to be really important to me, to be, like, we were really competitive, but we were really, everybody was just so good and so smart, and we pushed each other so hard. And that's really, none of us were really trying to sound like each other, or sound like Rick, or sound like any of the folks who came to Meacham, but we wanted us to each sound like our most amazing selves. And so it wasn't that I was like pulling in all these various influences, although I know I was, but I was really just being thrown up into the air by these amazing people who I got to work with.
Just down the line. Hey, Jared again. I would say probably one of the most impactful aspects of workshopping with Jackson is that I came very quickly to view and continue to view writing not just as an individual practice, but as a sort of social framework. And we saw that all over. We saw it in Meacham, where every year he had these vast networks of people flying across the Atlantic, and from California, and from Texas, and Arkansas, and all of them were friends of his. And we saw it in class when we would read poets from all over the world, and he would introduce each new poet as this is my friend. And as somebody who had him later on in his years teaching here, a lot of that was, this is my friend who recently passed. And to see just the level of connection he had in his writing community. And then of course we saw in Slovenia, where we got to go workshop with folks that he had known for decades, and artists, and so I ceased to view my study of writing as something I was pursuing as an individual, and more so something that I was using to build out a network of folks that were thinking deeply and critically and emotionally, and communicating those thoughts with one another. And that's something that, well, we'll talk more about how we've carried that in our practice, but yeah, thanks Rick for that.
Hi, Taylor again, here. What I got from Rick, I came in 99 in the honors program, and I was in his UHAN 101, Honors 101 class at the time, which was if you don't know, it's a 6-hour kind of intensive 2-class worth of just really challenging your ability to think critically. And coupling that with jumping straight into poetry workshop with seniors and people that had been there for many semesters. What I brought to workshop was I was just very hungry. I just wanted something, and something vital. And I think what I found there was a sense of community, a sense of the sort of the social dynamics that Jared's talking about, this idea of networking, but this whole extension into the world. And I think that's what the trips to Slovenia did for me, in many ways, being in a unusual, strange place, and being in the midst of these international pen writers conferences where I had no idea what was going on. The politics were so above my, Southern white boy, understanding middle-class white boy. I did not know, but I learned a lot. One of the main things I learned was that in some ways, we individually write poems, but a poem is not for us. And that sort of little bit of distance, you kind of realize that it's this valuable thing that can be more than it can be more than anything that I could have done on my own when it's read, when it's received. And so I learned that.
First of all, I have to say that as everybody's talking about these trips to Slovenia and all that, I just want to say, just to date me, I went over there with Rick. I think it was the first time he took students with him. There were about 10 or 12 students. I was teaching part-time here at UTC. I just finished my master's, and I was helping him with the Poetry Miscellany magazine. And but it was Yugoslavia back in those days. The wars hadn't even happened. I mean, we could certainly sense that they were soon to happen, but they had not yet happened. I just want to mention the generosity of Rick as a teacher, as a friend, a mentor. When I first walked into a creative writing class of his, I'm not sure why, I was very into a surrealist mode. I studied a lot of art history, especially 20th century art, and when I discovered that there were surrealistic poets out there, it just kind of lit a fire. And I don't think that Rick would have thought of himself as a surrealistic poet, but he was incredibly open and generous to the fact that that was where I was at that particular time. That's where my spirit, my aesthetic, and I guess my very early on voice was. And so maybe some of you remember there was a little book distributor company in Pennsylvania, I think it was called Camp Hill or something like that, that he would make everybody in his creative writing class put an order to Camp Hill and order a bunch of books, and he would tell us which books we needed to order. And so with me, he said, there's this Charles Simic guy, you gotta read him. There's this James Tate guy, you really need to read him. There's Ashbery, you need to read some more John Ashbery. He got me to buy that great collection of 20th century French poetry that Paul Auster edited. And he was so accepting of that part of me and of where I was when I first walked into his room, that I really felt the freedom to eventually develop a voice and find it. But it wouldn't have happened without Rick's generosity and his openness to his students.
All right, so this next question may not apply to all the panelists. We're looking for comparing what was different in this room with what happens in other workshop rooms. So if you went to a graduate program in writing and had workshops, kind of compare what those workshops were like, and if you didn't, go ahead and pass the mic. MFA programs, graduate programs are a great way to have some space to work on your writing for a while, but they're not a necessity for being a great writer. And I know we've had graduates who have taken other routes to being an amazing poet. So I'm going to hand it to you, Jared, and just if it applies, it applies.
So I'm from Chattanooga, born and raised here, and started what I would consider serious study of creative writing at 11 years old. And I went to the Center for Creative Arts here in town, where you had a major and a minor, and I was in creative writing classes and working in high school publishing and putting together literary magazines and reading events from the time I was 11 through 18, and then of course studied through college and did like a third of an MA in creative writing here. And so I've done a lot of workshops, is my point. And what I always appreciated about Rick's workshop in comparison to a lot of the others is that there was this structure of we're not here to write and rewrite and edit until we get a perfect poem. We're here to just write a poem and learn from that poem and then write the next one. And we would write something new every week. And it was through sheer volume that your poems start to become quite good over time, and that you learn something from each one that you don't necessarily have to revise and fix in that poem, but you approach the next poem with that new knowledge. And so that helped break down a lot of, for me, what was this very focused attention on finishing this piece and making this piece right, and instead open up to, okay, that piece is good and it's done, what's the next piece going to be?
I'll just add something real brief. I did not attend an MFA program. I went to Virginia Tech and got a degree in English and Science and Tech Studies. But my first week there, I think this attests to the strength and value and the resonance of Rick Jackson. So I went there and I tried to go there for poetry to work with Bob Hickok. First week there, Bob had stopped me in the hall, and as an MA student, I'm heading to another class, and he said, "Hey Taylor," we'd met at Meacham. He'd worked on some other papers. I communicated when I was applying. He said, "We're about to have workshops. You want to join us?" And I don't know what the politics are in your graduate programs. That was kind of a big move to bring in a lit student. But I turned him down, and that's kind of why I am where I am today. But that's another story. But that attests to the reputation of Rick and what little interaction we've had. It's based on Meacham and based on these networks and social groups that I got that invitation.
I guess I'll go in a couple of different directions with this one. I mean, when we were doing writing workshops in the late 70s and 80s, God, that's a long time ago, with Rick, part one would be the workshop, and then part two would be going and hanging out at a place, that no longer exists. I mean, I'm really looking around. There was a place down there called David's. There was a place up there called Scrappy's, named after the old football coach, Scrappy Moore. Sometimes we go to the Yellow Deli, which is back. I don't think any of us realized it was a cult at the time. But that was part two, and that was in many ways just as important. The social aspect of it, the fact that you were connected with these other writers and students and with this teacher. And so I ended up, I went off to Iowa for the MFA program there, and we had workshop every Monday from 2:30 to 5:30, and then everybody would go up the hill to this bar called The Mill up in the town there in Iowa City, and I thought, well, damn, they do it just like Rick does it. And I felt this sort of surge of kind of pride, I mean, this is right. This is what a workshop feels like, and it was one way in which I felt very much at home. Later, after I finished the master's at Iowa, I went to another program for a PhD, and we didn't go out afterwards, and everybody just kind of went their own way, and the teachers went this way, and the students went that way, and there was only on very rare occasions did the twain meet. It felt cold initially, and I just felt very deeply the sense of how special Rick's classes were and everything that they included and incorporated.
So I went to the University of Maryland for my MFA, and I had a similar experience where I walked into the workshop there and it felt comfortable like I knew that I knew what was going to happen. But a lot of my fellow MFA folks did not. And we had Sam Plumley was our professor, and he's a little bit like Rick. And the first thing he did was have this really scared girl read a poem, read her poem. And we all had to always read our poem, which was different. I don't know if he did it that way, like nobody knew who wrote what. Was he still doing that for y'all? Yeah. So we had to own up to what we had written in Stan's workshop. And so this poor child read her poem, and Stan goes, "If I ever write a poem like that, shoot me in the fucking head." And I was like, okay, Rick prepared me for this. I knew how to handle that. And everybody else in the room was like, what just happened? So I do feel like it felt like I had already been through an MFA. Not that I didn't learn and grow and all that from my MFA, but I really felt like I had already had one. And we had the same camaraderie, and it was very similar. So it just felt like I got an extended stay at, I don't know, the Poetry Hotel. And then I left and did something totally different. So. And I'm rambling now because some stuff is going on over there. I'm trying to,
Thank you. Our next question, so I somehow didn't phrase this question up here, so I'm going to try. We're kind of looking at how did workshop norms change over time, but also how did this workshop change over the time? I mean, it ran for 46 years. The rules weren't the same the whole time. So I would love, and I think we're going to go in chronological order again this time. Like, what were the rules of workshop when you were here that, as you remember them? What were either the rules or the norm, whether they were strictly stated or not?
I'm a little hesitant.
Yeah, the 80s and 90s are going to be wild.
Yeah, I don't think we had quite evolved into the direction of norms and things like that at the time. I mean, I'm not saying it was a free-for-all by any means. Rick helped us to understand the respect, the demeanor, the kindness, the support, the constructiveness that we needed to approach any writing by any of our classmates with. But I mean, at that time, we would submit poems, and Rick would pick a selection every week to share with the rest of the class. They would have our names on them, and we would read them, the poet or whoever would read them, and then we would go for it. So I'm not. It was just a great experience. Not so much because of any norms that existed, but because of the openness with which people were sharing, and nobody was really like abashed about it. I mean, everybody was ready and willing, and it was exciting, and it was very supportive without all those norms.
Excellent. All right, let's contrast that to the 90s.
So now I'm starting to doubt my memory. Did we not
We
have
were there
our
at the
names
same
on?
time. So
We had our name, or did
No,
we not
we
have
did
our
not have our
We
names
did
on
not.
it.
Okay.
No names on it.
But then we had to sit silently, so it became obvious pretty quickly who wrote what, because you were the one not talking.
And we had different type fonts on our.
Oh yeah. So, but the thing I really remember is we would all submit our poems, and then a couple of us would be drafted into putting the worksheet together. That involved a lot of photocopying and making poems smaller, and then like fitting them sideways and fitting that like, so they would just take up the whole page, and in workshop you turn a poem.
It was the long.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, it was a long sheet, and when Paul Gass turned one in, it was like 8 pages long, right?
Small quiz. What was the copy code?
Oh my God. I have no
Come on,
idea.
everyone. What was the copy code? What did it mean?
I don't know. I
It
just
was
remember-
Rick's birthday. Pete.
Oh.
It was 11/17.
I remember Rick's office number. It was 333. Halfway to hell, baby. So yeah, so you couldn't talk. Other people talked. It was brutal, not in a mean way, but in a like we're going to be rigorous about talking about these poems way, and it could hurt, but it needed to hurt. I think it felt good to hurt, right, in that situation. So we had norms, and there were definitely rhythms and expectations, and you were expected to be tough, and that was
I
really.
remember a rule, and it may have been a joke. I know we broke it sometimes, but I remember a rule that was you were not allowed to say anything nice about the work. Does anyone else remember that? Yes, I have a hand up
I
right
do
there.
not remember that.
I also remember the only thing you were allowed to say, you could own the poem afterwards if you
Yes,
wanted to.
but you
But
couldn't
the
say
only
anything.
other thing you could say was, I'm sorry.
Right, yeah. You could not defend your work. There was no like, oh, well, I was trying to do this, and y'all just totally misunderstood my poem.
Right, you had to take that frustration and energy out of the room and do something constructive with it.
Yeah.
Taylor, you would be next.
Yeah, so, I mean, I see there's a spectrum here, and the early thousands were on that, but I got the vibe, especially from some of the more experienced students that were with us, that this was that's sort of an era of a kinder, gentler reflection. The same was true with honors. But I will say this: our very first poem I remember quite vividly because there was no expectations, hardly anything. It was just write a poem, and you're going to come in and you're going to kind of introduce yourself, but you just read your poem. And so I remember this because my poem was so bad that I didn't get to finish the first line. Rick starts chuckling, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to hold this together. I've got to finish this. The show must go on. I was determined, and then it just a couple of chuckles here from the older students, and then some of my peers, and immediately there was a paradigm shift in my mind. There was just and I was just like, I don't need to finish this, do I? And he said. Rick was just like barely he was just like, no. And I thought, okay, this isn't about me, right? And in that moment, I decided sort of all that high school like scribbling in my room and thinking all this like angsty stuff, and like this is not about me. Paradigm shift. And from that day on, I was like, okay, this is about the poems, and that was such a freeing, liberating thing, and that kind of continued to the thousands, and I kind of got myself. I got a little. There was a particular flow, and this is something that maybe some people recognize that Rick would want out of a given workshop. So with particular poems, certain things that he wanted to touch on. And after 3 or 4 semesters, I mean, I'm sure several of you were like this, you kind of knew where some of these things were going. So I would jump in, like we'd talk a poem, he'd read, somebody would read the poem, okay, I kind of jot down some notes and said, okay, this, and this. Rick's like, we want to hear from anybody else. And somebody else would say a couple things. 10 minutes later, Rick starts saying a couple of the things that I've said right at the beginning. I was like, okay. He wanted to bring us through a process, and I think that some of the chaos, the apparent chaos, I think was very, very thoughtful, and you could kind of see patterns there, in how these came together, and I think that there was logic, and there was also a kind of humanity in this sort of process, even if I was sometimes impatient about it.
So again, towards the end of Rick Jackson's career teaching here, and yeah, a lot of the same base norms, right? Where every person is expected to read their poem. You're not allowed to talk during the critique. The harshness was there in Rick's critiques, definitely, but I think there was also a softening of the approach in that we fell into, and I don't know if this was an intentionally established norm or just the culture of our class, but less of a good, bad, or quality evaluation of the work, and more of an effectiveness, where we would often share, what did this poem do to me, in my mind, in my heart, in my body. At which point the silent writer of that poem can compare internally. Is that what I wanted this poem to do? And if it's not, then okay, something went wrong here. But we did have this this dynamic when we would workshop outside of class, where those of us that had been in Rick's workshop for a number of years could say, okay, here's my feedback, and here's what Rick's feedback would be. Were he to read this poem right now, and we would sort of prepare each other for workshop to skirt around the harshest of Rick's critiques. He would say, cut that line right there, and then we'd cut it before we would share in class. But the most powerful norm from my time in my memory is just how goddamn hot that room was. We were in the 540 Macaulay building while it was under construction, and in the center with no AC, and we would just be sweating it out there while our poems were being torn to shreds. And you bond through circumstances like that. And so I feel like a lot of those base norms were there, but like we're seeing, maybe there was a bit of an easing of how harsh everything that came down. So yeah.
All right, I have this next question, and I'm not sure that, I wrote the questions and selected the panel, and separate. Does anyone here teach creative writing? Okay, great. So we do have people who can answer this. So what workshop norms or things that you took from this room do you now carry into your classroom? And I'll start off with this, because I want to go off what Taylor was saying. This idea, and I tell my students this as soon as we start workshopping, that you're not your poem. You're a valid human being with valid emotions and thoughts, that those might not have made it to the page, and you might write a really shitty poem, and that's okay. We all live through that. And then also that your poem has to go out into the world on its own. You're not there to explain to everyone what it means. So it has to be on the page, so that's why you're silent. You let it go out there and see if it makes it. So all right. You and you taught, right? 3 of you?
I don't teach.
Okay, well since you just finished talking, I'm gonna hand it to Charlie.
Okay.
And then Aaron.
First of all, I really appreciated Rick's comments that he started things out with. I thought they were so on the mark. Of course they were. I really also value, because I wanted to make sure that this got said. Rick is not just a great poet, and he is not just a great teacher of poetry and the craft of writing, but he's a great teacher, period. And the first class I took from Rick was not a creative writing class. It was actually a class on 20th century American poetry. I think Liz was in there, I think David was in there. A lot of us were in there. A lot of folks who were in that anthology from our era were in that class, and in many ways that was where a lot of us first met each other. And I remember it took me about half a semester, but I finally actually wrote a paper for Rick that he seemed to like. And it was on a poem by Robert Penn Warren. I do remember that. And he had a little nice blurb at the end where he was talking about all the virtues of what I had written, and I was just feeling awesome and like I finally did it. And then at the end, there was a sentence and it started, I do have one small quibble. I don't even remember what the small quibble was, but I have never forgotten that word. Quibble. And I have used that word repeatedly when I give students feedback. And that word is so Rick. It represents a meticulousness, a tenacity with regard to the particularity of language or a given line, but it is also an incredibly gentle word. It's so, it is, you know, when you say that as an audience, you are ready to hear whatever the person has to say. And so whenever, and I do this often, whenever I use the word quibble, I think I know who brought me that word, and it's one of the thousands of things that I got from him. So that's my quibble.
So I teach now in like almost infinite number of settings, mostly non-traditional. So I taught a poetry workshop weekly for 2 years at the Bradley County Jail for incarcerated adults. I teach poetry workshops for high schoolers at summer camp and after school college readiness programs. I've been running a series of community potluck poetry workshops. I just got back from a year on Fulbright in Mexico teaching poetry at a university down there. All that is to say that I find Rick's teaching strategies and structures to be effective, like no matter the setting, no matter the context, no matter the makeup of the classroom. And so practically everything that comes out of my mouth in my role as a teacher can be attributed to Rick. If you miss his workshop, just stop in my summer camps or come with me to Mexico in May. I'm currently working as a fellowships advisor for James Madison University. We're not writing poems in that role, of course. I'm having students tell their life stories, identify the patterns that lead them to certain opportunities, and try to win them some money to fund their dreams. And something that I say all the time, I just hear it in Rick's voice, is cut the throat clearing. Cut the throat clearing. And it happens in every essay they bring to me. The first 4 or 5 sentences are meaningless. They're empty. They're clearing their throat for what the actual part is. And Rick used to, I'm sure y'all had this too, would draw a red line across the poem and say everything above this is clearing your throat and needs to go. And so I could talk all day about the ways that Rick's teaching has impacted my teaching, but that's the one that comes out the most, is cut that throat clearing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't teach poetry, but I teach, or creative writing, I teach academic writing. But I use so many of Rick's techniques in there. But the thing as I've been listening to y'all and thinking back, and I feel like I characterized Rick's classroom as kind of a place of cruelty. But it wasn't. It was a tough space, but it worked because you knew he cared about you a lot and that he really wanted you to do well. And so I have tried to embody that for my students, to let them know, I really care about you as a person, and I want you to succeed and do well and feel like you have pushed yourself in ways that were uncomfortable but fruitful.
All right, we have one more panel question, and that is anything that you haven't talked about so far that is a lasting impact from this workshop community. And we'll start with Taylor, and we'll go that way. All right.
So I think the main thing that I've carried with me, and it's maybe odd to say because now I just completed my PhD in science and tech studies. I just led a workshop, 2-day workshop in DC on nuclear policy. I do nuclear weapons and nuclear energy policy. But the thing I think that I carry with me, one of the things is an extension of that thought, right? That so much of intellectual work, whether it be creative or analytical, isn't about us, right? That there's a value that the analysis, the poetry, the policy that will affect people or won't affect people, that's outside of your control, outside of your influence. You get to choose those words, right? You get to have that for a moment. You get to have a role in creation. But at some point, it becomes a social good. It becomes this artifact, right? And that has a curious power that's both liberating and terrifying. And finding that balance, I think, is what gives me, is what has given me the confidence to try all the things that I do and to be where I am. And I believe that started in Yuhan 101 with Rick, in Poetry Workshop, day one with Rick. And I'm very grateful for that.
Oh God, I think that in that sense, I think that the thing that I've carried the most with me has just been the idea of the seamlessness between poetry and life. Rick and I did a lot of stuff together as teacher and student, and as friends, and as mentor and mentee. I'll hesitatingly take credit for it. Rick and I actually built the bedroom in the basement of his house one summer. You don't even want to know what that was like or what that involved, but we made it work, and it's, according to Rick at least, it's still there. He and I drove several times from Chattanooga to Breadloaf in the summertime. The thing that was about life was also what was about poetry, and that was something that I still firmly live by.
So mine is like this little thing, but that it does mean something bigger to me. And that is, whenever I was struggling for a title, Rick would say the title of the poem is in the poem. And sometimes it wasn't literally in the poem, but now whenever I'm struggling for something, for anything, like the title of the poem is in the poem. And that helps me find whatever I'm looking for.
So I'll return to that first answer I gave about how by partaking in the workshops and in Meacham and in the Slovenia trip, you sort of enter into the Rick Jackson cinematic universe. And there's all these interconnected characters and histories and stories, right? And it occurred to me sometime in the last 2 years probably that that's not like a natural phenomenon, that Rick did that. He built that through years and years and years of writing and networking and revising and critiquing and building these relationships that all of us up here and a lot of us, sitting out here were the beneficiaries of. And so when it occurred to me that that was something a human person did, I started doing it. And my second day in my placement in Mexico, I was in a poetry workshop and established a contest at my university down there for my students that was then judged by poets in the US and in Mexico that I met over the course of that year. Currently working on a cross-published international edition of 2 local magazines from Chattanooga and this little town in Mexico that want to work together. And that's still part of the Rick Jackson cinematic universe, right? That he brought me in a way that showed me that this is possible. You can build these international connections and you can invite people in I met people at the Furious Flower Workshop last fall in James Madison University that are judging my contest this year. When I taught at an incoming group of study abroad students from Mexico last summer in the US, and we happened to be doing homestay in Cleveland, where one of my high school friends, who's a poet now, lives, and she came and taught a workshop for my students there. And every time I do something in this, you know, in this context, I think this must be what Rick feels like, pulling this stuff together and bringing people together and making these connections and sending off students that I hope will be doing the same, you know, 45 years from now when I'm retiring. So, thanks again, Rick.
All right, our next phase is going to be if you were in the workshop or if you're in the anthology, basically if you were a student of Rick here at UTC, the mic is going to be open for you to read a poem of your own or to share a story of your time here. But before we move to that, there are two, we put a representative group up here, but we really want all the voices. And there are two voices who definitely aren't able to be here. They're students who have died. One of them, Mark Bilbrey, I'm going to read a poem from him. The people who went to school with Mark Bilbrey, who is that? Can you raise your hand if you... Okay. They would not let this project go forward without Mark. And you need permission and people's work to include them. And Taylor, are you the one who finally got me in touch with Vince?
Yeah.
Who keeps in touch with Mark's family. But this was like, I think over a 6-month project to try to track down Mark's family and his poems. And we got his, I think Julia found his PhD thesis. That was partially a creative thesis. So I'm going to read one of Mark's work. The book is dedicated to him and to the other student who has died, whose work is in here. Melanie, are you able to read that one? I tried at home, and I was there at the same time as Ted, and I couldn't get through it. So Melanie's going to represent that. Yeah. It also talks about a trip I was on with Ted, so it's just too much.
Which one do you want?
Are you okay with the Slovenian one?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Excellent. All right. Someone jump in for Melanie if she uses it.
Yeah.
All right. The dog of conversation. Let's talk then about the self. Woof. Look, the dog is sleeping like a windmill. All right. I'm also going to mention that there are so many connections within this group. So Ted is in the anthology, but so is his sister Laura, who was also a student a few years after Ted.
Can you hear me? No? I heard a no.
You gotta hold it up to the guys.
Yeah, that's why I asked. I never do it right. So this is a mural from a small church in the Slovene countryside. Dressed from peasant to priest, they dance from left to right, holding hands. Not the way I would imagine dancing into the grave. Not that I would really know what to think or how to dress or if it really matters what doom looks like. But the idea that someone might lead me happily into that moist cellar of earth to lie in the scent of stale roots. That I would go without thinking twice about a summer cloud passing over. That I would go without even glancing back at the smile on the face of the man or woman next in line. It scares me. But then again, they were thinking of heaven and all it had to offer. They were leaving behind the rotting bodies of the living the way the man in the mural on the opposite wall is not descending, but ascending into the warmth of the sky, surrounded by his true friends who are not afraid in the circle of light to gaze up at him with love, the only ones capable of seeing past what little we've been offered. Maybe because there was only so much room, 2 feet with sandals, 2 shins cut off at the ceiling.
All right, the mic is y'all's. Also,
there's a presentation going on over here of, on the computer that Julia put together with pictures from over the years and from stories and memories that people sent in with their submissions. You guys are dismissed. Thank you.
I am Son.
No, it's not on.
I'm Rachel Landrum Crumble, and I graduated in 1980. I'm going to read a poem on page 2, Courage for a New Year. All familiar things are released of connotation. In these early hours, starting over seems possible. A shoe on the step becomes hopeful, loses its dereliction, was going somewhere all along. Paper clutter on a bedroom shelf vibrates with history. Old photos, proof of a hard-won past, forecast an unexpected, cheery present. The blank page is a blizzard, and on dog sled, we course our way through blinding brightness. While the year is young, it seems possible to arrive. We cannot lose our way until we find it. Thank you.
Hi. I actually want to speak more about the past, and because Rick's here, but honestly, who knows for how long. So I just like to speak out and say that for me, the workshop was not about the workshop. It was more when I was 18 and I was Catholic and I was up on Cape Cod and I went to school up in Boston, and I thought I would never come down to the South. I thought I'd never come down to Chattanooga. And I had a teacher who knew that I had no money to go to college. And she took my poems and she mailed them to Rick because she was in the Vermont MFA program, and her name is Sheila Whitehouse. And they flew me down to the last honors college event they had, and I didn't want to go because I was really scared of the South and I didn't know why you lived here. I mean, I'm sorry, but I didn't. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to go? I'm Catholic. And honestly, the first thing people said to me, are you Christian or are you Catholic? Okay, I mean, I don't know. Anyway, but with Rick, he said, look, we're the same. You live in a shithole. I live in a shithole. And you want to get out of that shithole. I'm like, yeah, I do. I really do. I really want to. And honestly, poetry for me was just a way, to be honest, I hate to say this, was to get out of that shithole. It was a scholarship. And so I wrote poems. You want me to write poems? I'm going to write poems. You want me to write poems for all 4 years? I'll do whatever you got to do because I don't want to go back. And so for us, for years, Rick would actually have these workshops, but then later would talk to me for hours away from anyone else because he knew that I didn't know what was going on, because I don't understand all these kids and their problems. I got mom and dad about to be homeless, have no food, whatever, and Rick was like, no, I get it. And so Rick would talk to me about, honestly, how to fight people, how to break someone's elbow. Because I was like, I gotta go back to the neighborhood. And Rick was like, well, here's how you flip someone over. And honestly, this is true. For 4 years, I tried to flip that man over. And I finally flipped him over, right? You remember that? Because he's like, hey, Olson. And he would try to kick me. And I don't know if y'all remember this, but before workshop, right? Yeah, you remember that. And I flipped him finally. Now, it took 4 years, and he's probably in his 50s, but I did it. But the point is, we had a very unique relationship. We argued, we fought, we didn't speak, but he was always loyal, and he was like the dad that I never had. I mean, I had a dad, but he was better than my dad. So the point is, and with that said, years later, my daughter has actually spent, honestly, 3-4 years with him, just going to his office where he would just meet us for coffee, and he was like this great grandfather, because I didn't have a father who was a grandfather for her, and he would just honestly talk to her in this really sweet, nice way. Yeah, she did not get the Rick that we got, but that's okay, because it's always like with that grandfather, right? You're like, why are they so nice? And he would even give her like chocolates and stuff. He really did. Like, we went to a Valentine's Day in his office, and he invited us up to a Valentine's Day party, and he talked about love and stuff. And I'm like, when I was around you, we didn't get love. That wasn't what we got. But I kept telling Payne, you get different sides of Rick, you know, and it's amazing. It's like wine, fine wine, right? He liked wine, it was like wine, and he aged well, you know. And so, with that said, this poem that I wrote was actually, I wrote about I wrote about my father, but also thinking of Rick, and thinking of also Wallace Stevens, because I never thought I would be that person, but I became the lawyer. And I never thought I would become the lawyer, and I never thought I would be this, and I do write sometimes, I just don't like to tell people I do. So here's the poem, and I do have a stutter, and hopefully I don't stutter too much right now, but evening. My walk dangles, I am king, I am nothing, but I am beginning, a wear teeth stain and chip at holes I must bend. You see yet, don't leave. Love is too much weight is my thought of how this does not hurt, but guess it must. So Rick, I just want to say thank you for everything you did. I didn't forget it. And I think you were more than a poet. You were like a father, but beyond that, I mean, just a really good human being. So.
Hi, I'm Rich Bailey. I graduated in '82, and I am one of those people who's not in the anthology because I've turned away from poetry. Bad judgment that I have. However, I bring greetings and regrets from David Breitkoff, who graduated, I think, in '83. I think he was 1 year or 2 years after me. He planned to be down here from New York, but his flights got screwed up, so we had to cancel. So, this is Piano for Aunt Jeanette. Passing mid-chore through the living, I disturb the piano's sepulcher with a flat minor chord misgiving, hammer to an inaudible rupture of the current, which which courses the porous vase set atop my mother's upright. Out of discord stirs a countertrace, sonata ashes sifting in moonlight, straying through the permeable mystery, as though an expiring breath of air could wind its way home from history. Sacred zephyr, sweep aside the folds of my ear, linger, bearer, within the leitmotif, to sculpt in sound your face in bas-relief. David Breitkoff. Thanks.
Hello, my name's John Jones. I was a student here from, I think, 92 off and on until 2000-ish or so. And I had a few semesters off in between there. I never graduated, neither here nor there, but in that time I was fortunate enough to have, as someone said last night, span a couple generations of students, and went to a lot of Meacham workshops, a lot of Rick's workshops through that entire time. I regrettably did not contribute to the anthology, but you know, I'm planning on turning it in next semester. Typical thing, but I actually went back today and looked in the files and found my first Meacham conference sheets with Laura Kashishki. At one point, I know I had one of Mark Cox. I just want to say, I mean, you know, you look through, I think on the Meacham page, there's a sheet that has all the writers that have attended, and it's pretty impressive, but there are also a lot that aren't even listed, because I remember, like, you know, a few, like, I think Tom Rabbit wasn't in there. I don't know, James Tate, I don't think James Tate was listed in there, but a lot of the folks that have come in and just being able to not only hear them, but meet them, you know, Phil Levine, Bill Matthews, and, you know, some of those guys that were really important. And about Meacham, I just say, you know, I think and I think it was Charlie at the end here, you know, the one thing that I would say more than anything else is just how incredibly generous everyone was with their time, their attention, and the students, you know, Rick, Earl, Ken, you know, and now Sybil, I mean, everybody putting together this thing that, you know, I know a lot of times they would come for nothing or a pittance or something like that. And Rick, I just want to say thank you. I know there's a Tom Lutz poem called A Horatian Notion, and in it, towards the end, he says, you make the thing because you love the thing, and you love the thing because someone else loved it enough to make you love it. And that's, I think, what all of us found here, so thank you.
Hello. Hi. I'm Sarah Wagner, and I'm really glad to be here. I also did not continue writing, although I'm sort of writing with drawings now. But I wanted to come up and say thank you. And I wanted to say thank you because one of the things that Rick taught me, which was one of the best things, was that grammar is logic. Because I can't remember grammar. I really can't. I have no ability to remember grammar. I don't know my left from my right. I can't remember it. I know there's lefty loosey, righty tighty, but I don't remember which way is which. So like doing anything which requires that is really hard. And being able to approach writing from a way that it just has to make sense. Like you just have to take it apart, paragraph by paragraph, but even word by word, and even sentence by sentence. And it just has to make sense. That's all it is. That's what grammar is. Grammar is a sense-making structure. And, you know, as an artist, I do have to write. I have to write artist statements. I have to write grant proposals. I have to write all the time. And it has saved me because if you can't remember grammar, you feel really dumb. Because it's so simple. And all you have to do is remember it. Learn these rules and remember them. And if you can't do it, you can't do it. And that has been just absolutely transformative for me, so I'm grateful. So what I contributed to this is from a memoir that I made actually to thank my friends. And it is the best lesson chemo taught me. So from a macro perspective, I was experiencing a great, albeit painful, lived metaphor. I knew that I was putting a toxin into my body, and then I got to feel it leave. I got to feel it leave. It was so beautiful. There was a beginning and an end to the pain. I don't know how to do this. With chemo, you know you're putting toxic stuff into your body and that it will make you feel bad. But on the other hand, the toxic chemicals I worked with and toxic relationships I sometimes got into came to me with little pain and sometimes without my knowledge. Toxins can be invisible and build up without you even knowing they're there. It's an old saying about when you put a frog into a boiling pot of water, it will jump out, but put the same frog into a room temperature water and it will bring it to a boil. The frog will cook. There's a grammar error there. I had felt so exhausted for around 3 years. My breathing was weird, and I knew something was wrong. I went to the doctor, and he tried to help, and we did find a minor hole in my heart, but nothing to explain my symptoms other than menopause. My doctor put me on antidepressants. But the problem had been cancer. And then when the tumor was cut out, I felt really, really, really good. Underneath the pain and the wounds and the chemo, I felt normal, I felt healthy, I felt strong. It was a great physical, experimental metaphor for how I didn't want toxicity in my life. I didn't want to hurt. I want to feel good. The best lesson chemo taught me was how good it is, how good it feels for poison to leave my body. Thank you.
Hello, hi. I'm Lacey Snap. Hi, Rick. He always gives me this look. He calls me his shadow. I went on to BCFA after this, and I would just somehow be close to him, and he'd go, and like act like he was scared. And it was our little bit that I don't know. He has a lot of bits. What do I want to say? I think first, just like thank you for this lineage that we're a part of. I know that you had mentors and you read people, and so for us to be a part of that now, and we're teaching. You introduced me to Phil Levine. You handed me Not This Pig, and you're like, read this. And then, well, you don't have a southern accent like that because you're northern. But and I read it, and then I went on to my master's in literature, and I wrote about Phil Levine being part of this working class lineage, and that just really sticks with me of how we're all interconnected, and I think we see that with each other all being here. So thank you for that. And I will say too, what I do now, every single bit of it, poetry touches in my teaching and planning literary events, and I think about Meacham all the time, so it's an honor to be here at Meacham. I'm going to read a poem. Oh, and this is after Marvin Bell, so thank you for that too. Becoming a ghost. Ghosts sit around my dining room table without place settings. They follow neighborhood children to the bus stop, pass me the shampoo in the shower, join me for my morning stretches, downward facing dog, ghost scarves fall, cover their heads, reveal transparency. Two bicker in the back seat on my drive to work, to the grocery store. One doodles in the freezer aisle, gets distracted fogging glass with his breath, drawing smiley faces with his silky ghost fingers. A shopper reaches through him to get a frozen pizza. My ghost glares, refuses to dissipate. Lady Ghost sits beside me in bed, complains about my tableside lamp. It keeps her up. I click it off, lay silent in the blackness, replay those moments that have long passed, moments I didn't speak loud enough. My ghost and I wander in Willow Springs Park. I lead the V of this flock of geese. Their linen white limbs billow in the wind, scraps left behind like feathers on the grass. They squawk at passerby, people who don't look at me, chase these strangers to their cars, nipping at their heels. One ghost sheds her veil, puts it in the tub to soak overnight. When she isn't looking, I slip beneath the water, try it on, relish in the unseen, love how it feels to officially have no face or name. Thank you.
So before I say anything, Danielle asks that if you were a student of Rick's, if you stay till the end, please don't leave. We're going to take a picture. I have two things to say, and the first is that watching Sarah speak moved me this whole thing is amazing, but there's something that we've never talked about in an explicit way that I want to say, which is that there are a lot of us who came here from Catonsville, Maryland, which is kind of a random thing. Greg Lyle's here, Jen Smith's here, Sarah Wagner's here. There are lots of people that aren't here. Wait, who am I missing?
Bradley.
Oh, yeah, Bradley, and people who were here before me that I don't even know. There's this whole tradition of people who came from Gary Blankenberg's workshop in Catonsville High School to Rick Jackson's workshop in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who went on to do a huge number of things. And it's just never been called out, so I just want to call it out that these two guys knew, I don't even know how they knew each other, maybe you guys do, but certainly Rick probably does. But that I was basically failing out of high school, and I loved to write poems. And my high school writing teacher was like, I know this guy. I got a deal. And it changed my life in ways that I can't even explain. So I just want to say that in ways that have been echoed today, that those relationships that sometimes get lost in the world today, that is so metric and digital and all these things, that two people had a conversation at some point that turned into this train that came down here. I don't know, it changed a lot of lives. So I just wanted to say that while we're talking about it. And the other thing I wanted to say is that there are other people sitting in this room tonight with whom I spent a lot of time outside of workshop reading poems on porches or in basements or in bars. And all the things that we're talking about today are so true and important, but also rippled into the community in other ways. And it happened at David's, it happened at the Pickle Barrel, it happened in backyards and barbecues, and probably in other cities, AWPs and bread loaves, and all across this country, that those of us who came into contact with Rick, there's poetry is just in our way of being with each other in a way that isn't academic and isn't in the classroom. And Danielle, honestly, our kids went to elementary school together in Atlanta, and I remember going to see you read in Grant Park at Little Street. So just it's a constellation all across the country of poetry that Rick facilitated, and I just wanted to.
You wrote one of my kids' favorite books.
Oh, thank you. But I just wanted to honor that this goes beyond anything we can track. So anyway, thank you.
Hi, my name's Liz. I'm in the book as Elizabeth Rose Bruce. I'm published under my full name, but I'm one of the 3 Liz's in the book, so I wanted to clarify that. I am currently finishing up my MFA at UNC Greensboro, studying under Stuart Deschelle and Amelia Phillips, who is also an alum of the program. And so there's a million things I could say about Rick and our class and how much he had to put up with from me while I put up with him. But I just wanted to say that it's been a joy moving. It's the first time I've lived outside of Chattanooga to a new city and having people who knew Rick. I met Stuart at AWP in 2018 when Rick took us, and already had his books because of Rick. And I had a fellow Chattanoogan and a neighbor in Amelia that made me feel really good going into the program and having some familiar faces, even if just by name. And there's something nice about being called a Rick kid. Or or being in a workshop and having someone be like, Rick taught you that poet, didn't he? So I feel very lucky for that. And then I'll just, I'm going to read The Poet at Sunset, which is on page 147. I wrote this poem in undergrad. The only thing that I changed after bringing it to workshop was taking out one word that Rick slashed through. And then this might also be in the presentation on the laptop, but it's the only time that he took a poem almost entirely whole. He wrote in the margin, simply a good poem, but he couldn't let that be all. So he slashed out one word in the last line. So I'm going to read that one, The Poet at Sunset. Again, you found yourself in that brief and translucent moment before darkness displaces the sun, that moment with which the poet is destined to waste their life, carving colors into language, like termites feeding constellations into a rotten wooden door to nowhere. Isn't that the poem? That entrance into the same place you've exited, shrouded by the moment before shadow overcomes light. Thank you, Rick, and thank you, everyone.
At 7 where they either start trying to get us out of the room or at least coming in and getting other things out of the room. We have 2 more people lined up to read. We're going to let that happen. Then we're either going to all the students, and we're using that term for people who are in workshops. So John, Jen, Rich, feel free to join us. We'll either take a picture maybe over there where it's good, space, or if they kick us out, actually, we'll go out to that hallway and do it, okay? All right.
I see the time. I'll say, Rick, I don't know what I'd be without you, but I wouldn't be this, so thank you. And let's say I won't read the poem that I wrote after you got me to read Ashbury, so I'll read the short one. I'm Jude. Hi, Jude. I graduated in 23. I'm surprised I'm in here. It's called No One Laughs. The leaves stumble and turn. It is autumn, and they fall, but not because they know it. A person walks up a hill and feels the sun soak into their black tea as they both crest. The sun does not cut into chill. Open, uncovered, arms of trees match those of the flesh walking below. The coats line hooks neatly in accent chair backs where they were plucked before their time. A person walks in a knit cardigan and sweats through her shirt. Her skirt catches no breeze. Friends discuss weather and winter parties. One suggests swimming on his birthday, and no one laughs. The leaves stumble and trip. It is still autumn, and they still fall, but not because they want to.
Hello, my name is Cody. I was in the workshop in 2013. I'll try and make this quick, but I think it's funny hearing about Rick's progression. I didn't know I was coming to UTC until like a month before the semester, and then I took the workshop on a whim from a friend's suggestion, and then she immediately dropped a class, so I didn't know anyone in there. And then I handed in my first packet of poems, and Rick just wrote, "These are not poems." Which is just a great first act to someone unexpectedly important in my life. So I wrote this when we went to Lisbon, and I think this was one of the first times where I really felt like I was getting it. So thanks, Rick. It's called Inner Dynamics. Everything sings here. The soft hum of the woman speaking Portuguese behind me. The train's own orchestra rumbling on the tracks on the way from Caixa to Sodré. I close my eyes and listen. The world seems as soft as the vibrato of my mother's voice the day her mother died. And then the train's chatter becomes the staccato rhythm of my childhood friends, stammering over each other as they learn to imitate the language of our parents. I never really learned all that language. I'm just piecing together meaning from momentary flashes, like the faces looking out of the train speeding in the opposite direction of mine. All of my love is just an inarticulate murmur. I can't even say I know you because I lose focus. You get blurry. The pitch of your being warbles and fades inside me as the train you are on speeds farther from mine. But I remember the timbre of your voice when we last spoke. Trembling and worrying and stumbling, I remember each syllable like this sunset, like the waves lapping against the beach, like the force of home, like crickets chirping, the moonlight on your face
Somehow the earth's every note sounds like saying, I'm sorry, to funeral guests that you hardly know. Like the orchestra inside this train carrying me home. As we slow, the crescendo is happening. It's always happening. It's waiting for us at the stop we are always leaving from. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm Greg Delisle. That Catonsville connection there. So when I got to UTC, sat down in my first poetry workshop. Sorry, it wasn't actually the first poetry workshop, that I'd been to, or so I thought. Because there were all these, older students. Some of them seniors. Boyd White was there, Katie Barati, and others. And we got right in. Somebody read a poem anonymously, and Rick started telling what he thought about it. And Katie slammed her hand on the desk and said, "You are so full of shit." And then she howled with laughter, and I thought, I am in a different place. This is not what I expected. 30 minutes. All right, I have plenty of time. Nice. I really enjoyed being able to be savage and merciless and whatnot with some of my best friends' most heartfelt work, and to have them do the same to me. I'll read this poem, which was for my wife Anu on our first anniversary, which is the paper anniversary. So this is paper anniversary for Anu. How do we include the world? How to bring everything to witness? To invite the air, the light, the waters and mountains, the soil and growing things, the gods, and all of time. How to bring everything we love to witness love. The coolest day of a long, hot summer, and the sun shone in patches through the leaves, through the clouds. Our families gathered and blessed us. Flowers shone their bright faces, and the smell of sunshine on the grass. Ladies in bright saris made their way to folding chairs, and the murmur of their smiles as they blessed us. Kids spun through the dance floor like gusts of wind, and musicians tuned their strings. And we arrived, as we always arrive in our own lives, with smiles and laughter and a touch of surprise. A horse, a tuxedo, a glittering waterfall of a dress, a love song. We arrived with love. We blessed each other with love. We blessed everyone, and the sun came out golden and blessed us. Shadows dappled by the hands of leaves blessed us. Clouds, the great temples in the sky, held their holy space aloft for us. Grasses hushed close, and the flowers turned their faces to us. Fire crackled, fed, and danced for us. Children played and gave their laughter for us. Farmers and cooks together made meals for us. Musicians played, sang, and stomped for us. And everyone danced. Everyone ate and fed each other. Everyone laughed and sang and played and clapped and raised a glass. Everyone smiled and swayed and held each other and raised their hands and touched each other and placed their hands on us. And together with the flowers and the grasses and the clouds and the leaves and the sun and the bold open sky, they blessed us. They blessed each other. And it may have rained just a sprinkle for luck. And someone may have got a little too drunk with love. And shoes lay forgotten by the dance floor, and the cake was all gone, but not the sweetness. And the fireflies joined the cousins and the crickets in their conversations, and the dance-off ended in a draw. But before the last love song rang out toward the lake, before they picked across the wet grass to their cars, before the last cider was tipped and the good night hugs, you and I had already slipped away to a quiet place, leaving this evening as a gift, a memory, a moment we could all carry, a moment that would carry us into the next year.
Get lined up over there. We're going to do this as fast as possible. If you don't have your contributor copy, pick it up. But after the picture, and then your spouses or friends can go ahead and shop for books if they were going to do that. All right, let's go.